Hi guys, I'm back. I'm also Sarah. It's very nice to meet you. I make these videos where I basically just pretend I'm talking to my mom, but I've done research before, so you guys are even luckier than she is. Today we're doing a video that's kind of close to my heart because I feel like I'm coming out. I feel like this is like a coming out video. I guess I've come out of that closet back there, so it is kind of a coming out video. I used to be a geek, like a super geek, and I was a girl, so I had to be super geeky to compensate for that. I'm gonna do the girl geek thing right now, which is justify that to you desperately. Please believe me, please. I used to look like this. Yeah, I used to be a geek. And that's not necessarily bad, but with the topic of today's video, it kind of is. Like, I went to Hot Topic, but not in like an emo way, and like a, wow, you guys have a Han Solo shirt? I've never seen a shirt that just has Han Solo on it. Here's the Han Solo shirt. I hold these little geeks close to my heart, but also in the just like the pit of my deepest rage. I was also an H3 viewer. I'm wearing a Teddy Fresh shirt for you guys today, like to commemorate that. I used to like have a lot of really ugly graphic tees that I wore literally every day of my life. It was that or this, and I would rather wear this because I think this one's cuter. During Gamergate and in the time after, I was an H3 viewer, which means I was an anti-SJW girly. I was so mad about the mad feminists who were so pissed off about the smallest little things, and they were so dramatic, and oh my god, feminists need to calm down. But I was also a feminist in like an Emma Watson way. Like, girls should read. Sarah lived a complicated little life as a child. So usually while I do videos, I'll do a makeup look. So today I'm doing the icon, the catalyst of Gamergate herself, Zoe Quinn. This look. I think I should be able to do it. So today we're talking about geeks and gamers and incels. When I was first scripting out this video, when I said incel, I didn't mean it literally. I've already made another video about incels and Taylor Swift, and that one I took the word incel very seriously. I've done a lot of research on incels just in general, so I know a lot about them, and I really didn't think today's video was going to be as closely tied to them as it is. The similarities that we're gonna see today between the geek community's origins and the incel community, and also just Gamergate and the incel community, is crazy. So stick around for that. It is crazy how history will just repeat itself, even in a time where we think like we know better. I think we always thought we knew better, but we don't. Before I start, I have a couple really interesting people that I'd like to shout out. John Michael Boynton, Raywin Campbell, Sonnet Robinson, Buddy, if I like mispronounce your name, or if anybody knows how to pronounce it correctly, please tell me. I'm gonna try my best. Kinyosian and Carter Souls, and also a lovely, amazing YouTuber, Innuendo Studios videos, Why Are You So Angry? Part 1, A Short History of Anita Sarkeesian. So good, please watch it. I'm going to link it. I'm gonna put up like one of those little card things now because it is so excellent. It is so good, and it provided me with one of my favorite resources that I'm using today, and it was made 8 years ago, so 2016, which is before I think any like incel rhetoric or even like the incel community got super large. So these parallels that we're seeing between them, it's crazy. I'm just saying, it's a really excellent video. Everything that I cite today is really excellent, except for, well, you'll know. But yeah, please check them all out. There's so many great pieces of media on the history of the geek, the history of the nerd, and women's experiences within them. So good. So please check them out. I owe them my entire life today. So yeah. John Michael Boynton cites the 1980s to the 2010s as an era called the resurgence of the nerd. The resurgence of the nerd, I think we can all see pretty clearly. Starting even in the 1980s with John Hughes movies like Pretty in Pink and The Breakfast Club, Anthony Michael Hall's roles in those films was the classic geek nerd. In The Breakfast Club, I think we call Anthony Michael Hall's character more of a nerd, while in Pretty in Pink, he seems more of a geek. He has some sort of social ineptitude and weird interests. He also has a lot of weird, like, sexually deviant behavior in Pretty in Pink, like just straight up harassment and then assault. I don't know if we should really be looking at him as the epitome of the nerd, but in the 1980s, that kind of behavior, especially the way that those were portrayed in those comedy movies, was like cool and fine and funny. When we get into the 90s, we start looking at stuff like Buffy the Vampire Slayer for more geeky media, and even the resurgence of the Star Wars franchise in the late 90s to early 2000s. The last prequel came out in like 2005, so from that late 90s to early to mid 2000s era, we were getting brand new content from one of the essential geeky media sources. So that was really, really big. Towards the end of this 2000s, we saw the emergence of Marvel as a big media juggernaut. The release of Iron Man in 2008 and then the Avengers in 2012 was a big deal. Not only were those films really, really popular, but they were funny and accessible to a big audience. The mainstreamification of superheroes was a big deal. The launch of Marvel into the mainstream also led to the huge rise of people going to San Diego Comic-Con and then other Comic-Cons as a result. When we see the combination of the rise of nerdy, geeky culture and the massive spread of the internet come together, that's when we create an environment that is rife with nerds and geeks just out and about. With that new environment that is just rife with nerds, we see the cycle begin, where the more we see them, the more media they create, the more prevalent they become, and over and over and over again. So that's how Marvel probably became the massive juggernaut it became, and also how it became overrated in the minds of many. So, you know, pros and cons. Now, this all sounds fine and well. New things happen all the time. New forms of media become popular all the time. The internet definitely made that even more possible because more people could just talk and people would listen. The rise of the nerd isn't necessarily anything sort of revolutionary in its own right. This all sort of came to a head though in 2014 with the occurrence of Gamergate. Now, Gamergate is a word that is used very frequently on the internet as some sort of like, it was kind of a cultural phenomenon, I would say. If you were on the internet at the time or in the time sort of immediately after, it was kind of a big deal, and having an opinion on it was also kind of a big deal. The internet was already a place that was kind of hostile towards feminist ideology. In the time of the mid-2010s, pre the reaction era of YouTube, we saw a lot of people reacting to like real life people instead of cringy YouTube things. That included a lot of feminist-owned compilations. Now, if you've never seen a feminist-owned video, then what year were you born? Were you allowed on the internet? Are you a happy person? I hope you are. You probably are. Essentially, they were videos where people would be reacting to women who were doing things that they deemed kind of overreacting in the name of feminism. So one that comes to mind to me, particularly as a former H3H3 Productions viewer, was the video about Humongous. If you don't know who Humongous is, I will play a clip, but I will also explain. Humongous was this man who was stopped by a woman because he did something she didn't like. He was probably somewhere he wasn't supposed to be or something, just walking through. I don't think he actually did anything wrong. But she then asked him his name, and he responded, Hugh. And she said, "What's your full name?" And he said, "Humongous." The woman in question sort of took this as a sexual remark, like referring to his...
My name?
Yeah, sure.
It's humongous.
Okay. Humongous what?
Is that sexual harassment?
No, it's humongous.
This person just spoke to me in a sexually harassing way.
I did not.
Yeah, he did. He said, do you know what my name is? And I said, what? And he said, humongous. What? Yeah. Yeah. This person just sexually harassed me.
I said I'm humongous.
Yes. Yes. So now you're actually pointing to yourself. You're actually pointing to your body parts. And you're actually pointing to your body parts and saying that you're humongous. How dare you? How dare you, you disgusting person!
Hugh says he didn't mean this. I don't actually know his real name. I'm sorry, Hugh. He was on the H3H3 podcast like multiple times and he made a video with them. So I probably should know his real name and I will find it out for you and tell you. But he claimed that that was not like a sexual remark. It was just like a dad joke. It was a pun. Everyone then went to take this as, oh my God, feminists are so dramatic. Like, why are they overreacting? This guy didn't even say anything to you. I agreed with this at the time. I thought it was a little silly, and I still think it's a little silly, but as like an adult woman now, I understand how you can be cautious of a man being in the wrong place and saying something that could be misconstrued as sexual. Overall, I don't think it's like that deep. But wow, did Ethan and Hila think it was really, they thought it was that deep. And a lot of different people also thought it was that deep. A lot of these feminist compilations went super, super, super viral. Lots of people were watching these kinds of videos. It was a super popular kind of video to make. So this was the environment that you would sort of come onto in mid-2010s YouTube. Now, I have a theory that It's Everyday Bro by Jake Paul sort of caused a massive shift from more social commentary like that to reaction commentary of like cringy stuff. Do I have any evidence to prove that? No, but I just remember how important It's Everyday Bro was to the internet in 2016, so you should believe me. If you were on the internet in 2014, 2015, 2013, that was like the kind of content people were making, at least in the internet I was on. Obviously, the internet has always been very large and very varied, so obviously that's not the only kind of content people were making, but the internet was ready for something like Gamergate. Gamergate began when this lovely woman, Zoe Quinn, released her game called Depression Quest in 2014. It was text-based, so it was already not going to really fit in with the more typical like RPG, Fortnite, pre-Fortnite, GTA, like it wasn't, those boys weren't gonna like it, which is fine. Not every game is made for every single person, just like not every single piece of media was made for every single person. Now, our friend Zoe here committed the cardinal sin of existing as a woman in gaming and received actually a pretty good review from this man named Nathan. Now, Nathan was a pretty prominent gaming journalist. He published for a couple of gaming websites, so a good review from him was really important. And she got it. Good for her, right? Now, usually we would end the story there. She got a good review on her game. Hopefully people who like that kind of text-based game buy it and play it. It was based on her own depression, so it was a pretty important game to her. So all in all, good story. Should end there, right? But of course it doesn't. Zoe's boyfriend Aaron decides to tell the boys of the world that Zoe slept with Nathan to get that good review. Now, did he have any real evidence of that? No, he didn't. He didn't actually have any real evidence of Zoe sleeping with Nathan, but the boys believed him. And Zoe's affair ended up being the catalyst for a harassment campaign. Zoe's game got slated, got called not a real game because it was text-based and about depression instead of pew-pew. I'm gonna say this, I'm not really a gamer girly. I had a Fortnite phase. I was really good. But like, other than that, I really don't play video games. I play The Sims and Stardew, and you can call those real video games. I believe you, but I'm not a gamer. So my opinions on whether or not a text-based game is a real game, I don't care if you like trust my opinion on that. Zoe's crime here that led to this harassment, doxing, everything, was just allegedly having an affair and her ex-boyfriend telling everyone about it. This harassment campaign obviously grew because of course it did, and it was all being coordinated on a lovely website. Now I'm gonna sit here and let you guess which website that was. Ding, 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 it was 4chan. You got it, good job. 4chan, starting with Zoe, ending with no one, probably. It's 4chan. They conducted a harassment campaign on Zoe, sent her thousands of threats, threatened assault, death, her job. They doxed her. They sent nude photos of her to her coworkers. She was put through the ringer, and she called it a burn the witch movement. Now, Zoe was not the end of Gamergate, unfortunately. I mean, ideally, it would have never happened, but of course, Zoe was not the end. The next major Gamergate movement would be against our lovely friend, Anita Sarkeesian. Anita Sarkeesian was a YouTuber, video content creator at the time from like the 2000s on, like late 2000s on. She was a content creator who focused on feminist analysis of like geek media. She's been compared by our friend Innuendo Studios as like a contemporary of Lindsay Ellis. I love Lindsay Ellis, so even if I haven't watched any of Anita Sarkeesian's videos, I still love her. She created videos about like how like Lego marketed to women or didn't. Anita's most popular video series was called Tropes versus Women, where she analyzed different like TV and film tropes and how they treated women, different examples of them, etc., from a feminist lens. So again, she's coming into this world in the late 2000s, early 2010s to an we already know a hostile environment for feminist creators. But then she, again, commits the cardinal sin of existing as a woman in gaming. After the release of the first 6 videos of Tropes vs. Women, which centered around the TV and the movies, she decided she wanted to make another little series of it based off of video game tropes. So in order to do so, she put up a GoFundMe asking for funding to help with that. And within a few months, she was successful. She went above and beyond her goal, and she was fine. She had gotten the money for her videos. She was doing fine. Good for her, right? Another success story in the women of the gaming world. Of course, again, it didn't end there. Our old friends 4chan found the GoFundMe for these new series of videos, and they were not very happy with her. They ensued with their little routine of harassment and threats on our girl Anita, just like they did with Zoe, and once again, she was not very happy about it, but they decided to escalate even more. They decided to spread the idea that this whole drama was orchestrated by Zoe to promote her GoFundMe, despite the fact that she had already exceeded her $6,000 goal and all her reach goals by the time the drama happened. She also ended up making $100,000 or more for the GoFundMe, despite her goal being $6,000. Obviously, this whole situation was not good, but she made her money, so good for her. The 4chaners were trying to claim ownership for all this money that she's made and say that it was their harassment campaign that she started that caused the raise of money. But again, that happened, as our friend Innuendo Studios tells us, before they even found out about the whole Tropes versus Women thing. The 4chaners do what they do, and they continue to harass Anita, and they even call a gaming conference that was supposed to be giving her an award and tell them that they will shoot it up if they do. So the threats have definitely escalated at this point. They also say they might shoot up a school if she speaks at one of these conferences. Like, she's put through the ringer. And they even make a game where the whole point of the game is just to assault Anita. So again, Anita was coming into an environment that was already hostile for her kind of content creator. And you know what? She was very brave. She trucked through it. She talked about this, which is so important. She didn't just like hide away and not talk about it, even though that is also a fair response. But she let everyone know what was happening to her. She kept track of all of these threats. It's kind of depressing because, again, she just got thousands of threats. She filed them to the FBI. She had to keep track of everything that all these people were saying to her all the time and calling her. They were doxing her. They were doxing her family and friends. They were threatening her entire livelihood and life. And she just had to keep going because 4chan never gives up. Now, again, Anita, poor Anita, was not the end of this either. She was followed by Miss Brianna Wu. Now, Brianna Wu was the co-founder of an indie gaming developer called Giant Space Cat. Brianna Wu got put next on this lovely list of women because she was mad at what happened to Zoe Quinn and Anita Sarkeesian. Yeah. She had an opinion on Gamergate. She wasn't happy about it. And so naturally, because she's a woman with an opinion in the gaming realm, she was next on the list. She began receiving death threats and threats of rape. Brianna was doxxed to the point where she had to flee her home with her husband. Now, she took all this doxing, this harassment, this threatening behavior from the men of 4 and 8chan. Lucky Brianna got 8chan on board too. And she created a fund for other people being harassed in the same way. She knew how hard it was to get legal action done for this kind of stuff, so she helped create a fund for those kinds of people. And that's really cool. She was still receiving threats until 2016, at least. Gamergate happened in 2014. And when I say it happened in 2014, I mean from Zoe to Brianna. All 3 of those incidents happened in the same year. All these coordinated harassment campaigns happened to these 3 women, amongst other people, in the same year. And Brianna even said that she got diagnosed with PTSD as a result. I mean, obviously this is traumatic. She was getting doxxed and harassed and threatened. She couldn't have been feeling well anytime she had to go out in public at the threat of any of these thousands of people online threatening her, threatening death and rape. She is a immensely kind person who says that she would accept apologies from people who are truly apologetic for it. I am not. I'm not. So if you did that to any of these women or any other woman or any other person, really, like, we'll tussle on behalf of Brianna and the other women. These threats, this harassment, all this had real life consequences. Brianna Wu said that she literally got diagnosed with PTSD as a result of it. Zoe Quinn felt fear every time she went in public because she knew it was always a possibility that any of the people surrounding her could be also part of that harassment campaign and could hurt her at any point in time. And Anita Sarkeesian literally got threats called into different conferences that she was at that people would be bombed, people would be shot if she was there, if she got to speak, if she got an award. So this was a big deal. This was not just something that was online, but people online who weren't there for all of this harassment, people who didn't even engage in the harassment, kind of saw it as not that big of a deal. They saw it as something of a joke. They saw it as, yeah, like they were being mean to her, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And Anita's being so dramatic, like she's taking these tropes too seriously. She's just a radical feminist who's crazy. Zoe Quinn's just a cheater. She cheated on her boyfriend. She deserved to get treated the way she did. Brianna Wu existed. Again, I don't know. I don't know how people played down this thing that happened. I don't know how people were on the side of the harassers. I don't know how people did the harassing, how people took time out of their day to dox these women just because they were existing in the gaming realm. I don't know. Obviously, thank God I don't know, because I'm not a crazy, awful person. But it happened, and it was just taken as this sort of like, wow, that was crazy. That was weird. Wow, people were overreacting. People weren't overreacting. And then we moved on, and we kept up with those anti-SJW feminist-owned compilations, and we kept up with our lives on the internet. We kept laughing at the girlies who said air conditioning was sexist and the people who did the mansplaining for the week. People made fun of the term mansplaining and manspreading and they thought it was dramatic. In sum, nothing really changed. Again, I think it was Jake Paul who caused the shift away from the anti-feminist content on the internet. It could have been a multitude of other reasons. I don't know. I'm not a professional. I just talk on the internet. But yeah, I mean, after 2016, 2017, we saw a lot more people just be feminists and not make it a weird thing. We saw a lot more silly, goofy YouTube haha content that was not about feminism. So yeah, the world moved on, except we didn't. And we're seeing a resurgence of this real hatred for women once more in a group that is near and dear to my heart, the incels. Inceldom, again, was started by a woman. If you want to hear more about the origins of incels and a little more background on that, if you're not familiar, then you should watch my other video. I'll put it up there somewhere. It's really good. I was proud of it. It was my first video, so be kind, but I've done a lot of research on incels, so I tried my very best. Incels were created by a woman to describe a group of people who were having trouble finding physical intimacy in the modern world. It evolved from that point to essentially end up now being a group of men who just hate women because they can't have sex. Now, that sounds kind of separate. Yes, we've seen campaigns of people just either threatening harm or actually committing violence against women from both of these groups, but it seems kind of separate. But when we look into the origins of the geek trope and the geek community, we kind of see why we're seeing those parallels and why, when we look at the current geek community, they don't look that different from incels. That's just my opinion, but it's kind of true. Com Kanyosiang and Carter Soul wrote an excellent piece of just media called Postmodern Geekdom as Simulated Ethnicity. It is really good. Please read it. I'm gonna obviously link it, but it is excellent. It's not very long. It's really it's a quick read, easily read, has a lot of really popular media as examples in it, and it makes the history of the geek really easy to know. Like, they did an excellent job. I really like it. You don't understand the excitement that I had when I found this, so please read it. It's really good. So the geek community was built on a trope, right? The trope of the geek who was very academically talented, but maybe not always so academically focused because they had these sort of niche interests, like in the modern day Star Wars or superheroes, maybe in the past day comic books, classic movies, film. Really, it could be anything that you can be a geek about, but essentially having a really strong interest in one topic, traditionally not very well liked in the public, in the mainstream. Essentially, their thesis is that the way that geeks created a niche for themselves in a world where being an oppressed white man was not very easily acceptable in media was by simulating ethnicity and simulating outsiderness. There is, I guess, presumably some sort of inherent struggle that comes with being a person of color that, at least in media, you can use just as a baseline. It's unlikely that we see a person of color in media nowadays who doesn't have racism acknowledged as some sort of struggle that they face in the day-to-day, which makes sense because it literally is. But being a white man in media, you have to have something else. Like, your parents have to be divorced, or you have to be an orphan, or something. To be a white, able-bodied, straight man who's also cis, it's like you don't get any of that automatic people feeling bad for you thing because you don't have any inherent struggle. It's not true. I don't want to hear anybody go like, oh my god, but like, I'm poor. Like, I believe you. I believe that you've had struggles in your life, but this is just like a super general, and also mostly about media. So in order to create a whole new trope, and a trope that then gets applied to people and then becomes a real life community, you have to have some sort of underdog mentality or some sort of issue that people can sympathize with. So for geeks, who again are mostly portrayed as white men, that became a lack of sexual prowess. Of course, in practice, there's gonna be other stuff too. People usually have some sort of actual like conflict. So whether it's like a girl you like that you can't get, or you're just trying to fit in with the rest of the world, simulated ethnicity is not the only thing that makes the geeks, you know, have an underdog mentality. Geeks are often portrayed as not being able to get the girls that they want, always losing in a sexual or romantic way to jocks or other like non-white people. And the way that we first see the asexuality, like emasculation of the geek bit, is through the very beginning origins of the geek trope. Typically, we see geeks as people who are at least portrayed as Jewish or Eastern European. They were deemed as sort of asexual, feminine people, just in general. Jewish or Eastern European men had less sexual prowess than a normal white man. So they had that aspect already that was, you know, the otherness. Nowadays, we see that most emasculated trope with people who are usually Asian, non-English speaking, or just like foreign. When you see a geeky friend group on TV, usually the person who is the most geeky, the least sexually available, is going to be the one that is Asian, whether East Asian or South Asian, or I guess Southeast Asian, or not English speaking, not fluent in English. They are emasculated in a way that like white men in these groups usually aren't. And now those are usually Eastern Asian people, South Asian people, because they fit in also with that like model minority, super smart, people in China only ever do school thing. But it used to be Jewish men or Eastern European men, because, you know, it always has to be someone. But when we look at the white male nerd, he is usually sexually inept, yes, but still has sexual desire, still can be seen as romantically interesting, just has a harder time of it. They're usually less traditionally attractive, or they dress themselves in a way that's less traditionally attractive. So that's when we see like the glasses with the tape and the suspenders and the pocket protector, all of those things that are maybe a little more old-fashioned, a little more outdated, that would make them seem less appealing to a woman, I guess. The white male nerd is usually either contradicted with a white jock, or by a black person, a black man usually. In a lot of geek media, black people are portrayed as more hypersexual, people who can more easily obtain sexual partners, who are more easily promiscuous, have more sexual prowess inherently. It's racist, yes, but this whole trope is also built sort of on racism. It's a commentary on the idea that black people are more inherently sexually promiscuous or sexual in nature. It's weird and gross and racist. So is the emasculation of Asian people. Both things are very common tropes in media and just racism in general. So it's not surprising that the geek trope was built on the backs of people of color, but also on women. So women in geek tropes are usually portrayed as dumb. Like, we don't often see, especially in the early stages of the geek trope, we don't often see a woman geek. Part of this is because women are considered to be more sexually available than men are. It is considered more easy for a woman to have a sexual partner if she pleases. It's way more common to just discount a woman for having any sort of sexual desire, so it's not a big deal if a woman isn't able to find like romantic or sexual companionship, because it's not as big of a failing on her part as it would be for a man. Obviously, that's super flawed and weird and sexist too. And we'll see it be even more racist because obviously black women and brown women are portrayed to be as more promiscuous and more easily like swayed into sexual activity and more readily desiring it. So there's a lot of racism built into the geek trope, as there is for a lot of media tropes that we see. I mean, we have Urkel, I guess. I haven't actually witnessed Urkel for more than 3 seconds, so I couldn't tell you if he embodies any of the like harmful stereotypes about black people. Along with the lack of sexual prowess, we also see the geek getting the girl as like a common end goal to geek narratives. So oftentimes we'll see the girl, not named, who needs a name? We'll often see the girl being with a more traditionally sexually prominent person, whether that is a jock or a black or brown man. We see this in The Social Network. And when the Zuck gets his girl stolen by an unnamed black man, because, again, who needs a name? Who needs a name when you're not Mark Zuckerberg? We see the opposite happening, where like an East Asian person or a South Asian person will be seen as less sexually important than his white counterparts in The Big Bang Theory. Because at the end of the day, Raj is the only one without like a super important female counterpart, without any big like romantic relationship. Obviously, Leonard gets Penny, and Sheldon gets Amy, and Howard gets the little blonde one. I don't know her name. Maybe her name's Amy. Raj is the only one who doesn't end up with a prominent love interest that I know of. The fact that I could tell you at least 2 names of the other guys, like it's important to them. And I also know that Raj can't talk to women.
So you guys work with Leonard and Sheldon at the university? I'm sorry, do you speak English?
Oh, he speaks English, he just can't speak to women.
So he plays right into that trope. We'll see like inversions of that trope too. Even in like Pretty in Pink, Long Duck Dong, he ends up being pretty sexually promiscuous, which is not really common at the time, but I think it's supposed to be an inversion of the idea that a foreign person isn't supposed to be sexually promiscuous or sexually available even. And I think that's a joke. It's not supposed to be like, look, he can like get girls too. I think it's supposed to be like, haha, look, he can get a girl. No, he can't. That's a joke. At least according to Kyunseing and Carter Souls, this is how they achieve their version of racism for their simulated ethnicity. This is their racism, that nobody will sleep with them. Doesn't that sound really familiar? Yeah. I mean, the geek trope was built on the same things the incels were. And if the geek trope stayed in media, that would be great. It didn't. It didn't. When you see someone who you identify with on the screen and a lot of other people see the same thing, communities arise. Obviously, people self-identify as geeks. People kind of see themselves as that. They identify themselves with that and then find other people who identify themselves with that and go, oh my god, I have such trouble getting girls too. I love Leonard from The Big Bang Theory. Even when we look at the very, very beginning, to see our first real life portrayal, actual person, Geek, and one of the people who really contributed to the geek prototype as a whole, we start seeing the problems arise. Let's talk about Robert Crumb. Robert Crumb is a cartoonist who created Zap Comics in 1968. Zap Comics was like a collection of comic shorts, and then there were series within that. He created a character named White Man. Great start. Kyunseing and Souls say that this is like how you would read it straightforward. I say don't be racist. White Man is basically just a white middle class man, and the whole comic is just him being so stressed out because he's like so like he's smart and he has so many things to think about, juxtaposed with a bunch of really, really like grossly stereotypically drawn black men who are having the time of their lives. That's White Man. White Man is our Crumb going, it's so hard to be middle class and white. All these poor black people are having so much fun, but I'm just spending so much time thinking and it hurts my head. And I'm gonna cry. This was apparently some sort of like attempt to show that there's a group of white men who, just because they aren't marked with some sort of like, just because they are not part of an underprivileged group doesn't mean that they don't have problems. The depiction of black men and just black people in these comics is really, really gross. Like disgustingly gross. I'll show a picture, just I guess trigger warning. It's really gross. It's super, super reminiscent of really racist comics of days before this. This man could have done better, but he didn't. Our friend Robert says that it was an intentional choice, that it was supposed to be like some sort of commentary on racial stigma in the United States. I say, did we really need to see that? I guess it is a commentary about something, but it's also revealing that this man thought that this needed to be said. He then made another comic called R. Crumb Draws the Blues, where Jimi Hendrix is portrayed as being super sexually promiscuous because he's super like cool and unfazed, but R. Crumb is really having the time, like he's having a rough time of it because he's so intellectual. Again, another depiction of black people just being like mindless, having less intellectual capability than our friend R. Crumb and his poor white Midwestern life. It is just racist and it's unnecessary. Again, he says it's like some sort of commentary. R. Crumb was considered some sort of countercultural figure. I wouldn't even call him a geek necessarily, but his style was an indicator of what it looked like to be a real life geek, a real life like white male geek in the world. Being a comic book artist, especially in like the 70s, was not like a cool job. Really, it was like an artsy fartsy. Nowadays it's a little bit different because it's cool, or at least cooler, but back in the day I understand that can be something that was considered unmasculine because it couldn't provide in the same way that a traditional blue collar or even like a white collar job could. So that's where he sort of got his countercultural identity from, not just because he like was a comic book artist. He liked art. He felt like he didn't fit in with the more typical masculine scene, so he was, I don't know, different from other white men. He was less socially accepted than other white men, so he decided to take it out on black people and women. He decided in his first comic, Fritz the Cat, that he should portray African American crows, because the main character was Fritz the Cat, who was another self-insert for R. Crumb. African American crows had no trouble at all getting the girls. So Fritz the Cat and friends, his little white friends, were so jealous of the sexual prowess of the black crow. Black men were apparently living absolutely rent-free in R. Crumb's mind. He saw them as so much more sexually apt. He was so much more inept at them, at getting girls. So he saw them as just like, and portrayed them as inherently sexual, calm, not just calm, but like imbecilic people. Because they didn't have as much trouble as him getting girls, apparently, they were less intelligent, that they had less trouble in their life. He had a fundamentally harder life because he was less able to get sex. Now, R. Crumb was probably not the only person who was saying this kind of stuff back then. I guarantee, actually, he was not the only kind of person saying that kind of stuff, but he was definitely a prominent figure. His comics were very popular. So he sort of created this precedent for countercultural white male tropes. At this point, the geek trope was not nearly as big as it is now, or was even in like the 80s and 90s. So this was a pretty important work. And his comic work in general, at that point in time in the late 60s to early 70s, his work was some of the first like big countercultural like geek adjacent media that they had. So it wasn't like he was just some guy saying some stuff. He was pretty popular. He was pretty prevalent. And he didn't stop there with the harmful depictions of groups that weren't his own. R. Crumb had this character named Scutch. Scutch was this like ladies' man. He had lots of sex, I guess. Scutch was portrayed as like not a great guy, but had more sex than R. Crumb, so good for him. I don't really care about Scutch. What really matters here is the women that Scutch interacted with. Nearly every single woman that like Scutch slept with or was seen interacting with was kind of just dumb or easily manipulated by Scutch's manly wiles. There was one comic, I'll put it up here, of him just like interacting with this girl and she's like falling all over herself just because he's like speaking to her. A lot of the women in R. Crumb's novels just act absolutely brainless. All of the conflicts here really are between men, so women are the main like currency in those conflicts. R. Crumb isn't mad at Scutch for mistreating women. Because Scutch does mistreat women. He treats them like they're literally nothing. No, on the contrary, our friend R. Crumb thinks that women who get involved with men like Scutch or like Jimi Hendrix deserve when they get left behind or abused or mistreated. So that's not an issue. The women's well-being is not in Scutch's mind. It's not in R. Crumb's mind. They're not real. R. Crumb is mad that women even engage with Scutch, and therefore the fact that they choose Scutch, someone like Scutch, over R. Crumb means that they deserve any sort of bad treatment. We won't see this kind of thing as explicitly in modern geek content, but we will see a woman getting treated poorly by a man who isn't the geek main character, and then her being so grateful that someone finally treats her right, but she only gets treated right because she gets with the geeky guy. Like, he is considered so much better than the other guy, and he doesn't care about the mistreatment of the woman that he desires, his object of desire, because she inherently doesn't deserve it. There will often be other women who he considers like more sexually promiscuous or undesirable because of that, and they deserve that kind of treatment because they are the kind of woman who deserves it. Someone who's more sexually promiscuous, who is considered less intelligent or less important to the narrative, will get treated poorly by the jock or by, I guess, a black man, and deserve it because they are not the object of the guy's desire. The geek will only care about the harassment, the mistreatment of women when it is someone he desires, and when he gets her at the end, then he treats her better than the jock as a point. R. Crumb is a little bit more explicit than this, and one of his comic ends in the final image of a bunch of women being, it's really disgusting. One of his comics ends in the final image of him being on top of a pile of women who look like they're in various states of undress, and they look like they've been like mutilated. Like, it's really gross. And he is standing atop them, like climbing on top of this pile of women with a crown on his head, and they are all praising him. Several times in his comics, women who don't desire him, or who he desires and don't desire him back, and who are with other men, will receive literally like physical torture as a result of not wanting him. And they are only redeemed when they finally want him at the end, because he's so much better than the other options. At this point, that was the only role women were allowed to have, either objects of desires or examples of women doing the wrong thing, wanting the wrong guy, and getting unnecessary punishment. And that like image of the women on a pile was in a comic. The series was titled My Troubles with Women. That specific frame was called If I Were King. So this is the countercultural ideal, that women are apologizing and saying, I'm so sorry, I should have known you were the right person all along, and still functionally are objects to be desired just by the right kind of guy this time. In the follow-up to My Troubles with Women, My Troubles with Women 2, R. Crumb gave us a lovely example of an actual real-life woman. Apparently he doesn't actually talk to those very frequently, confronting him. I'm just going to read off of from this comic. I'll put it up here. Font's really small, so I'll read it for you. Fame is power. I remember this one beautiful girl who presented herself to me. This was in '69, in the first flush of my fame. After a few solid days of rutting, she suddenly stared at me intently and asked, so like, what makes you the big cool countercultural hero? Like, why does everyone, like, think your comics are so hip and groovy anyways? You don't seem like the type to me at all. And then he says, fuck, I don't know, but it's all bullshit. And then pointing at her says, my first blowjob. Pointing at him says, high on acid. So this is a literal interpretation of something that allegedly happened to this man. A woman who slept with him all of a sudden has this like revelation that he's being gross and weird, and he's so obviously like, oh my god, it's not even that big of a deal, and is just appeasing her so that she keeps sleeping with him. And this isn't like the first or last portrayal of women that he sleeps with in real life. Again, this is not anything fictional anymore. This isn't Fritz the cat. This isn't some hypothetical about Jimi Hendrix or anything, or White Man or Scutch. This is actual R. Crumb. He is drawing himself and speaking about his personal experiences. Every single time you see a woman he sleeps with, she is mindless. All this intellectual turmoil that he keeps writing about, he keeps drawing about, like in White Man, he's so like intellectually stressed out compared to all these like black men on the street. Or in Scutch, like the R. Crumb guy is so intellectually stressed out compared to Scutch. Here, he's so intellectually stressed out compared to these women. These women don't have a thought in their minds. They are just there as objects to be slept with and to do like acts on him. And you see even in that comic that I read out, someone is like confronting him because they know that his comics are so popular that he is some sort of icon of counterculturalism. He doesn't exist in his own bubble. He doesn't exist in his own like mind. This is a comic writer who's very popular amongst a community of men who are like him. This portrayal of women is not isolated, right? This goes on to influence other stuff. And it might not seem as obvious now, but it is. There's a line. There's a line that goes from the R. Crumbs to women who nowadays are there just to be pretty, who are there just to be the object of desire of the men in these like geek-centered comedies, the geek-centered romances. Women who are there just to be examples of what it is like to be someone who the geek doesn't desire. Someone who is too vapid, who is too stupid, who is too sexually promiscuous. Let's jump back to our early 2010s geek culture and let's hear from some women, finally. I'm going to be citing both Raywin Campbell and Sonnet Robinson. They are two very cool, geeky, nerdy women who wrote some cool stuff about that. So please read their stuff. Obviously, I'll cite that too down below. Sonnet Robinson, in her thesis, which is like 80 pages long. I didn't read all of it, I'm sorry, but it's good. What I did read is good. She discusses the fake geek girl trope, a trope that states that like there's a sect of girls who pretend to like things like Star Wars, like Marvel, other like geeky things, just to impress geeky men. Now, we see that R. Crumb comic that I read out, the one with the woman confronting him, her apparently farcical confrontation of his intentions, some sort of display of knowledge over what he's talking about, but it's so obviously fake that it's not even like something to legitimately consider. That turns into the fake geek girl trope. A woman so obviously not actually being interested in the things you're interested in, but is just trying to impress you. She's just trying to like show you that she likes the same things you like. Wearing an AC/DC shirt and saying that you like rock music, or wearing a Star Wars shirt and saying you like sci-fi, but not actually doing it. You're just doing it for the approval of men. Sonnet Robinson discusses about how prominent men in the gaming community think this is. Her thesis, she basically surveys a bunch of geeky women in that community to discuss their experiences with the legitimacy of their like geekdom. She finds that basically women just have to prove themselves very frequently within these spaces and face a lot of like harassment and criticism from men within the same spaces because they aren't actually geeky enough.
There was so much gatekeeping from bronies about female fans, which I know is a very talked about issue in like all fandom spaces, but doesn't it just have that extra edge of bitter irony when it's My Little Pony? I had been an avid fan of this for years when the brony fandom popped into existence, and then suddenly I was facing all this scrutiny from bronies who thought I was just jumping on a bandwagon to like, I don't know, get dates with bronies. When I went to my very first BronyCon in 2012, I remember our plane landed the night before, so we went out into the courtyard area between all the con hotels in front of the convention center because all these bronies were congregating and like talking to each other and stuff, and there was a group of bronies standing around talking, and one guy was holding a very large, expensive looking custom plush pony. It was obviously an original character, so I said, wow, that's a really nice plush. Who's this pony? And he turned to the rest of the group at large and said, wow, she hasn't heard of my OC. You know, there's real fans, and then there's this. And I just like retreated in shame because I didn't want to talk to them anymore. That was my first moment of BronyCon. Bronies also had such a huge disdain for female fans who would like ponies before they did, you know, before it was cool to like ponies.
It's not surprising to me. Obviously, we've discussed what it was like to just exist as a woman in any of these communities earlier. So it's not surprising that there was so much hostility towards women at the same time in the same space, and that it was so possible in these men's minds that a woman would try and infiltrate their spaces. For a group of people who like made fun of safe spaces as a concept so much, it is crazy that they thought people were trying to invade their safe little geek space and that they got mad over that, but it's just me. Another like realm of this was Raywin Campbell's How I Fell for the Muppet Man, which I love just as a title. It's so funny. Because like what? But Raywin Campbell specifically cites how women's bodies are still used within the geek community. Again, it doesn't have to look like R. Crumb climbing on top of a literal mountain of women as the king of them all and getting apologies for them for not liking him enough or something. It looks different now. She actually finds that male creators within the geek spheres, like making geek web series, TV shows, films, are still like using women's bodies as a means to entice the men within those same communities. She actually cites Dan Harmon, who said that he literally puts Alison Brie in positions where her cleavage is showing to entice men to keep watching his content. So geeky men, no matter how much they try and other themselves and say that they're like different than normal white men, are still using women in the same way. It's just they just call themselves geeks. Raywin Campbell also cites that geekdom isn't newly popular in the 2010s just because it's cool to be a geek now, but rather that geekdom has now proven itself as a means to fulfill traditional masculinity. That makes sense when we look at like the .com boom of the 2000s and the 1990s. As people in those more traditionally geeky, nerdy spaces became some of the most prevalent, prominent people in the world, some of the most successful, rich people in the world, people like Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. As those kinds of people became the alpha guys of the world, their niche, the whole geek thing, the whole nerd thing, also got legitimized. Not because anybody was like, wow, it's actually really cool to like Star Wars now, but because they are suddenly, where they used to really not have that much like economic power, they're now suddenly the top of the economic chain. They can now provide in a way that they might not have been able to before because their niches are all of a sudden profitable in a way that's like out of this world. That's when you see the like alpha malification of the geek or the nerd. You'll see this in memes from like the 2010s. I remember these and I remember thinking they were very cool. I don't anymore, they're kind of cringe. But like, I'll show some here, but there were like pictures of like Bill Gates that are like, don't worry if you're getting bullied in high school, nerds rule the world. Don't worry about your bullies, you'll be their bosses one day. Nerds rule the world, so don't like be nice to them. That was a genre of meme and plays into that like to Raywin Campbell's idea of like traditional masculinity and nerddom. It did become a more like legitimate way to present yourself in a masculine way. Do I look like Zoe Quinn, guys? I think it's cute. I think it looks pretty good. I'm gonna try and fake a slit in my eyebrow and see if it works. I don't think it will, but whatever. Now, if we look at geeky spaces in the modern day, like 2024, we see the natural progression back to overt sexism that I think R. Crumb would be so proud of. Shut up. Shut up. That looks really good. On camera, that looks good on camera. If I have to read the word MSHU one more time, I'm gonna explode. I'm gonna show you guys just some like thumbnails of some of our modern geeky faves. But they're still making sexist commentary videos. They're still critiquing literally anything that has to do with women. You'll see, again, like I don't want to say the word MSHU ever again, but criticism of women being more involved in the processes of making geeky media. It's like they have a problem with that. They're mad that the Silver Surfer is going to be a girl.
Disney announcing the most MCU of MCU decisions.
We've got to pander harder!
From the people who brought you female Taskmaster, female Loki, female Thor, and up until this point, the worst of them all, female Captain Marvel. No, not that bad female Captain Marvel, this bad female Captain Marvel. Ladies and gentlemen, Disney Marvel presents the latest character and casting announcement from the Fantastic Four film that will blast misogyny in the face with the power cosmic. Female Silver Surfer.
They're mad about the Marvels movie because it's all girls. I'm not that surprised. Again, I was there in 2014, 15, 16. It's not like I don't know what it was like. It's still there. It's still there. At the same time, guess who they're still using to get people to watch their videos? Other men who agree with them. Women. They're still using our bodies. They're still using cleavage and butts to get people to watch their videos. No matter how much they want to criticize us even being involved in their spaces, they are still going to use us to appeal to the people in their spaces. They still make videos where they talk way too much about things that nobody cares about their opinions on. I guess I'm one to talk with my Dune video, but I'm still right about that. Just like R. Crumb did, just like Dan Harmon did, just like everyone else does, our bodies are still valuable enough to them to use as advertisement, but not valuable enough to listen to.
This class of activists despise straight white men and take pride in degrading and immiserating them. Where they can't humiliate men of European descent, they actively marginalize and ostracize them under the rubric of inclusion. This is the sole focus of their activism and has been for decades now. They are proud of it, they proclaim it, and they have achieved it.
I don't know if the sexist geeks of today would really like the comparison to incels, because I don't think incels are nearly as accepted as geeks were. That's one thing that I see just as a difference between geeks and incels, at least in their inceptions. Geeks have kind of always been somewhat of an underdog and always seemed well-intentioned or have been given sympathy by the regular public. Incels, not so much. They give themselves lots of pity, but most other people don't. So I'm not too worried about people sympathizing with incels on that front, but it is interesting to see how two communities that started off really similarly, with really similar rhetorics and really similar rationale. Again, geeks started out, they only sort of got on that whole sexual inability thing because they needed something to make other people feel bad about them for. Incels, I guess that's kind of their whole thing. I have a few points just to end with. Incels are not my favorite, obviously. I don't think all male geeks are sexists or evil or pro Gamergate. And I don't think that all women who have ever been part of the geek community have been harassed out of it. Obviously not. I'm still kicking. I think sometimes we need to look at the people who are the highest risks for being put into groups like incels. When we look at radicalization, some of the biggest factors that play into the radicalization process are loneliness, insecurity, and the lack of purpose. I am not surprised that a community built on insecurity, at least when it comes to sexual prowess, shares so much with a radical group that was built on a lack of sexual prowess. That's not surprising. When we see communities like this taking advantage of women's bodies and devaluing women in their own spaces, I think we need to be a little bit more critical and a little bit more aware. We need to be looking for those red flags because they're happening all over the place, and the last thing we really need is more incels. We don't need more people who are constantly devaluing the lives of women and considering them as just sexual objects to them. This is going to sound a little weird because I don't know how many parents are going to see this, but if you are a parent of someone who is chronically online, especially a boy who is chronically online and who has really big insecurity issues, please put them in therapy. And this is 100% serious, because when we let teenage boys, middle school boys, grown adult men sit in a corner and be on Reddit and 4chan and then 8chan all day it is really, really risky for them to be radicalized, whether it's into the incels or any number of other radical groups. That kind of behavior is not healthy. I'm going to try and find some resources for you. Not that anybody's going to use them. If you like have anybody who you're afraid is like in that kind of position, who you're worried about, who is honestly too chronically online, I'm going to try and give you some resources for that, because it's really dangerous and it can be really scary. Please don't become an incel, I guess. When you see like a group of people start to devalue another group of people, be worried. Like, it's just not something cute or fun or cool. When you see people who are just very explicitly just against a woman, take that seriously, unless she unless it's like Ghislaine Maxwell. When you see these coordinated campaigns from places like 4chan, like, that's not something we can just like neglect. Obviously that has real life implications for these women who were seriously like affected and given real life threats and real life consequences for it. But it's not something the rest of us can get just like let move on either. That's not something that's like cool. Brianna Wu, her like effort to create funds to like help people who are harassed in a similar way to her, that kind of thing is like really under acknowledged. Oh wait, let me try and do a fake, like a little lip piercing. Let's see if it works. Do I look like I have a lip piercing? To conclude, take people seriously when they're getting harassed online, please. In law enforcement, at least in the US, that is super, super risky, because that's just not how things get done. Like, threats of violence, especially from someone anonymous online, it's really hard to get like justice for that. So when we let these things just go by, like socially, when we're just like, oh yeah, that was really weird, awkward how that happened, don't do that. It's super serious, because you never know if it'll happen to you. Lobby for legislation to keep people online safe, please. When stuff like the AI stuff with Taylor Swift happened, the consequences of that are like far wider reaching than just her. Like, I know that the girlies don't like her or whatever, but like it's really dangerous. I don't care if you don't like Brianna Wu or Zoe Quinn or Anita Sarkeesian. Like, they're all of these women's experiences with harassment online are important. It's scary stuff, so please take that seriously when it does happen. Like, that's not something we can just like let pass by like we did with Gamergate. It ended in bomb threats and like school shooting threats. Like, it's not cool. On the flip side, if you're worried about someone being involved in this kind of harassment campaign, being involved in groups like incels, please look out for some signs. Don't let it pass by if you see someone get like very chronically online. Like, and that sounds like a joke, but it's not. It's one of the biggest indicators that someone's like being radicalized. If you know someone who's like recently had some sort of huge loss of purpose, if they've lost their job, if they've gotten a divorce, been through a breakup, lost a friend group, and they're suddenly like very, very online and start speaking like not themselves, please, I'll try and put some like links. Yeah, it's a big red flag that they might be at risk of radicalization or might already be in the process. It's really hard to, at least again in the United States, to prosecute for like radicalization online. Like, it's hard to prosecute radicalization in general, but especially with groups like incels who start and usually end online. It's like super risky because it's not as regulated or taken seriously as something like the KKK or like ISIS or something. It's really sneaky and really like subtle, so please check in on your friends who are men. I guess that's a really weird thing to have at the end of this video. Radicalization is scary, but it can also be stopped. Know the warning signs, especially for online I couldn't tell you what happens when somebody becomes a KKK member, really, because obviously, but I know about incels. So yeah, if any of your loved ones start spending a lot of time on 4chan, that should be a red flag, just like from the get-go. If you find yourself really like start to like devalue a group of people, go like talk to your mom or your dad or someone who you trust and value. Have you ever been a geek? Have you ever been part of geek culture? Did you have an opinion about Gamergate when it was happening? Were you alive when Gamergate was happening? Were you allowed on the internet when Gamergate was happening, actually, is a better question. I really enjoyed making this video. I really enjoyed doing the research. Please, again, support all these authors that I've talked about today. Please watch out for your friends. I want to thank my girl Lauren. She's been like, she watched my last 2 videos and commented on both of them, and she's been very supportive, so thank you. I appreciate you. I want to thank everyone else who's been watching, and subscribe, please. Yeah, I hope you liked it. I worked really hard on this one, and like it if you liked it. And if you got really upsetty spaghetti about my June video, I don't care. Yeah, no, I don't care. Okay,